Welcome to the SubHub podcast. I'm Emkay Sullivan.
And I'm Danny Moreno. And today, our episode, while we are recording it early, this is actually going to come out the day before Black Canyons, which is really exciting. It's finally here. Woo-woo.
Yay! I'm very excited to be racing at Black Canyons, but what I'm most excited about is to pass out our new stickers.
Yeah.
I think Corinne messaged me the other day and I was like, I'm going to be handing out I Run Sub Ultra stickers like on the start line of my first like long ultra.
You should just carry them like in a fanny pack, and whenever you
Just
get
hand
to
them
the aid
out.
station, just like throw them out, and people will be like, "What is that?" Just jumping on the floor, getting in the way. No, I love it. That's actually
Yes.
so funny. I love that. What is that? An oxymoron, or the fact that you're running an ultra and passing out some. What is that? What do you call that?
A contradiction,
I
I
got you.
think.
A stark
I'm a walking contradiction.
the irony. I think it's the
Oh, I
irony.
like that too.
Oh, the irony. Yeah, so we are very, very excited to be passing out some stickers. I guess this is kind of our official like merch, first
Yeah.
first allotment of merch. I will also have many, many stickers that our very own MK will have cut by hand. So blood and tears and happiness put into these stickers to be ready for Black Canyons. Yeah.
Yeah. So stick them on your water bottle, stick them on your car, give them to your friends. If you see us at Black Canyon, we'll try to have a bag with us at all times so that we can, pass out a bunch of stickers.
Yeah, I should just put a sign on myself too, like ask me
Ask me,
yeah, or just
ask me about my stickers.
ask me anything, but actually only ask me about my stickers. I love it. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, we have stickers. Another fun announcement. So we hope that you all saw, I guess, kind of backwards walking. I don't know how to say that. Right, rewinding it back. Hopefully you entered our giveaway. So at this point, we don't have the winner because we are recording this early. But by the time this comes out, we will have our two winners who would have each won a race entry to Loon Mountain Race and Cirque Series Snowbird, a pair of craft shoes, a UAG. I realize it's probably pronounced dope kit, not dop kit. When I looked at it afterwards, dop kit, runner's binder PDF, Grayson Murphy planner. Like, oh my
And
gosh,
some
what?
never second
And some never
as
second.
well.
Yeah. It's such a sick giveaway. So hopefully you had a chance to enter that. We do have plans for more giveaways this year. So just, follow us on Instagram if you aren't already. So hopefully if you didn't get a chance to win this one, you could win the next one. And then also,
Congrats to our winners, even though we don't know who they
yeah,
are yet.
congrats to our winners. I was kind of thinking it would be fun too to like get some content of them at each race if they do end up doing the double and posting it on our Instagram as like a collab with them. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm into it.
Yeah.
And
And
then the
you
other
have,
thing
yeah.
that we're excited to start, we're hoping that you guys will put some links in our website, in the bio for this, in our Instagram. So make sure you go check it out. We're gonna start a monthly newsletter. The first edition will come out on March 1st, so it still will be a little bit, but after some thought, and especially like you guys have already heard our opinions on like the Troy stuff. Like we want to provide you guys with a space where we give you guys results and maybe some stories so that you can kind of go back and look at those results throughout the year, especially at the end of the year when you're looking for sub ultra athletes to add into your award picks. But yeah, anything else in the newsletter, Danny?
Yeah, just iterating that we'll have the results and then we're going to select an athlete of the month each year.
Yes.
Or sorry, each month. We're gonna select an athlete of the month each month, someone whose results stood out to us or someone who just stood out to us for other reasons. So yeah, you can keep that in your back pocket. Do we want to release or say the name? Yeah.
No, you guys
No.
have to
Okay,
wait.
we'll keep it a secret. But MK and I have been hard at the whiteboarding, creative thinking lately with titles for all of our new stuff. Hopefully you also had a chance to see that we had a new sub-series launched within our podcast called the US Championship Chronicles. First 2 episodes are already out if you haven't listened to those already. But yeah, now we have another fun section that this intro is kind of kicking off. This is going to be called, drum roll. Go ahead, Emkay.
Candid Coaching.
Truthful convos with some of the best coaches in the trail running world.
We need like a
Yeah.
a sound that we add on top of that.
Yeah. Maybe not the like wah wah. That's kind of
Too much. Like I'm imagining like fairy lights almost, you know.
Yeah. But yeah, we kind of teased this. We've teased this probably a couple of times, but we are very excited about this because what these episodes will be focused on is we will bring a coach in. We are going to start with Emkay's coach, and then we will bring in my coach and provide kind of that inside to the coaching athlete relationship conversation that happens like during a training block, leading up to a big race, post race, etc. Emkay and I both have coaches, so we personally are big fans of having coaches. Some people coach themselves, which is also awesome. So maybe we'll have some of those people on. But yeah, we're gonna not only have our coaches, but also bring on other coaches who specialize. We're trying to mainly focus on like sub ultra stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And so hopefully we'll get to sprinkle that out kind of throughout the year for you guys. And yeah, we're really excited to be adding another sub series. But like Danny said, today's episode, our first one is with my coach, Rick Floyd. I've been working with Rick for about 7 years now. I think I started working with him right before my marathon debut at CIM in 2018. But I have known Rick for a little bit longer than that. When I was in college, he was the volunteer assistant at Nevada for, I think, a year and a half or so. And so worked with him a little bit when I was an athlete at the university. And then after I graduated, we became friends. And I was looking for somebody who I thought could help me on the roads as well as the trails, because I knew that that was something that I wanted to pursue. And Rick was like the only person that I knew that ran trails at that point. And I loved him as a coach. And so, yeah, we've been working together since then. And he also coaches, for those of you who don't already know, my friend and I guess teammate Helen Mino Faulkner, who was 3rd at CCC last year. So hopefully you guys enjoy this conversation and a little bit of an insight into like what my coach athlete relationship looks like.
Yeah. And I am not coached by Rick, but I am a big fan of Rick. I really respect how he trains Emkay and Helen. So I'm also very excited to listen to this episode. And we should note too that I am not going to be in on this conversation because that's part of like the fun of the series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a little MK Rick chit chat. Hopefully you guys, hopefully it's not as long as some of our phone calls.
Yeah.
But maybe it is. We'll see. But hopefully you guys enjoy.
Yeah. And before we switch to Rick Floyd, that's his last name, right?
Yep.
Okay. I don't know why that's always so hard for me to remember. I will also be racing tomorrow. So I'll be doing the Mesa Half Marathon, and then I will be heading over to Black Canyons. And I was telling Emkay that I like want to run fast so that I can get over and watch as much of the race as possible, because it's like, it says it's 30 minutes, but I don't know with traffic if it's longer, but I'm trying to get there before, definitely before Emkay hits the 50K. But even before the front guys would be like the most ideal. So myself and Tabor Hemming are both going to go run and then try and, head over as soon as possible. So it's gonna be fun.
It's going to be a sub hub party at Black Canyon 100K.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So best of luck to Danny. Best of luck to me.
Yes.
Check out our results after you listen to this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Enjoy your conversation with Emkay and Rick.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Never Second. Never Second uses a modular system that allows you to create the exact carbohydrate formula for your need and activity. Their products are meant to be mixed and matched so that you can have 30, 60, 90, or even 120 grams of carbs per hour. As a professional athlete, I was introduced to Never Second about a year ago after a rough race at the Mont Blanc Marathon. I was trying to take in gels that required a lot of water, but without a crew and the fact that there weren't enough aid stations to adequately match my intake, it became quite the struggle of a day. After that experience, I started using Never Second in training because their liquid gels weren't as sticky and require less water and are much easier to get down, making my race day and training nutrition immediately more successful and simple. Their gels also contain 200 milligrams of sodium, which is a real bonus on hot days and especially humid days, if you're me. And if you want to try Never Second, just head to neversecond.com. That's never, Never number 2.com. Never number 2.com and use code SUBHUB25 for a 25% discount on all of your orders. Hey Rick, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am good. Well, when this episode comes out, I'll be running Black Canyon tomorrow, but as of right now, you have me kind of in my taper, and so I'm going a little bit taper crazy, but not too taper crazy. Seems to be a
Yeah.
lot more volume going into this race than typical marathon 50K builds.
Yeah, we're keeping the volume up a little bit higher this time. And I think that should help too with the pre-race jitters going into the race. But in general, since it's such a long race, you don't have to be perfectly tapered or sharp for the race. So you're ready to
Yeah.
go.
We can talk about this later, but I feel like you don't taper me much anyways, so I'm kind of used to it at this
That's true.
point. So yeah, we kind of already did an intro of how you and I met, but I feel like we should maybe talk about it a little bit more. What do you remember, I guess, about when or how we met and got this whole thing started?
Yeah, so we met. So we were living, my wife and I were living in Bend, Oregon. This is back in 2016. My wife was going to apply to medical school. And so she got into a couple of schools, and Reno was kind of our top choice. And so we decided to move to Reno in the summer of 2016. And at that point, I had decided that I wanted to get into collegiate coaching. So I'd reached out to the head coach at UNR, and I just said, do you have any openings or any opportunities for me to like come help out? I don't come from a collegiate running background, so it was kind of a reach, but he was willing to interview me. And so it's kind of a funny story. I had actually driven our moving truck from Bend to Reno straight to the interview, and like had parked it at, you know, that restaurant that he like always takes like recruits and stuff to.
Archie's across the street?
No, no, no. The other one, like the brick
Oh,
building.
Stonehouse.
Yeah, yeah, Stonehouse.
Yeah.
So I had like driven, and I like literally drove from Bent and like drove and parked in the parking lot for the interview. It was funny. But yeah, so I think that's when once I started working with UNR, that was your last season.
Yeah.
And so that would have been 2016. And
Yep.
you were not running cross country, but training for the upcoming track season.
Yeah, so I wasn't really around a lot that semester. I think I was allowed to train with the team like 2 or 3 days a week because I was out of eligibility for cross country. So I spent
Yeah.
a lot of time on the ditch trail by myself because I lived close to the ditch trail.
Hmm.
Which is probably why, like, anytime you've told me to run on the ditch trail for this training block, I've died a little bit inside. But yeah, I feel like track season, we got to know each other a little bit, but I feel like we mostly became like friends when I started dating Tommy, who was working with your friend Eric Schulte.
Yeah.
And they started trail running together, and they were trail running with you, and I got all mixed up in that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's kind of how it ended up working out. And then I think once you were done with college running, and then I decided that I wasn't going to continue down the collegiate path. And then I was kind of pursuing trail running stuff, races on my own. That at that point we had started to run together. I remember I think that was the first time we ran together like a big trail run. I remember we ran Castle Peak like in August, right before you were going to have surgery.
Yeah.
And I just remember looking back when like you were hiking one section. I remember telling you like hiking is running too.
And it's funny, like looking back on that run, the section that I was hiking, I feel like I would never hike now.
Yeah,
Like I'm just such a better trail runner, but at that point
yeah.
I thought you were gonna kill me that day.
It was like a come to Jesus moment for like your trail running career.
Oh, for
Um,
sure.
but then I
Yeah.
think right after that, that's when you had foot surgery, right?
Yep, I had foot surgery in August of 2017, and then I had to take some time off. I moved to Vegas like in December of
Hmm.
2017, moved in with Tommy, and then kind of was like I came back from that surgery and was like, I'm gonna do track like by myself. How fun. And so I worked with Jabri Harris, who was the UNLV coach at the time, for like I think I ran the Carlsbad 5000, and that was like my first experience with like post collegiate coaching. And Jabri was great, but training for a track event by yourself is extremely boring. Like without a team, it was just not something that was that interesting to me. So then I had a full crisis, thought that I didn't like to run anymore, told Tommy I was done running. And then he was like, maybe we just like don't run track and we try to do something different. And I remember we signed up for the Silver State half marathon, and that was going to be my first ever trail race. And I was so excited. And then I rolled my ankle, classic Emkay.
Yeah,
But then after that, I think was right around the time that you and I started talking about you being my coach.
yeah. And yeah, I remember our first conversations with it, you were like pretty reluctant at first. And I think it's because at that point I was running, I was also working like at a fitness center. And I wasn't coaching a bunch of other runners at that time. I think I was coaching one other lady at the time at the fitness club for some trail running. And so I had thought about kind of getting coaching. I definitely had decided after the year of coaching UNR, like I did not want to go into collegiate coaching.
Understandable.
And it definitely wasn't going to work out anyways with my wife in medical school. So um, that's when once I started getting into sky racing and I'd race Silver State and I started doing well at some trail races. And I think then that started to give me a little bit of credibility then that I kind of knew what I was doing. And so I think the combination of like my coaching background and the racing is like, okay, well, let's do a little trial and error. But I definitely remember you being a little bit hesitant and like, "Oh, I'm not really sure." And so it definitely took a little bit for like the buy-in period for coaching, but so far
Yeah.
it seems to work.
Yeah, so far. I remember thinking like I wanted a coach to train me for CIM because I was going to run my debut marathon and try to qualify for the trials. But I
Yeah.
knew that I also wanted to like trail race, and you were the only person I knew who like coached and also knew what a trail race even was. So I was like, Rick could probably do this. Like we can give
Yeah.
it a shot. And
Yeah.
I mean, it worked. You got me to run, I think I ran 243 or something, or like 244 low. So I hit the Olympic trial standard like the very first time.
Yeah.
Um, and that was, I think, kind of when I was like, okay, for sure, like Rick is my coach forever now.
Okay, okay, that'll work.
Yeah. No, I think that's the evolution of our coaching beginnings, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess, did you always know that you wanted to coach, or was like collegiate coaching kind of the beginning of that thought?
I don't know. I mean, when I was younger, I mean, I remember in middle school, I played like football and baseball and basketball, so I don't come from an endurance background. And so, but I remember in middle school just like writing down constantly like football plays like on my notebook and just always thinking about like I remember like being like I'm gonna be a NFL football coach like one day. And I, I think that part of me like wanting to like figure out the process like from an early age was something that I always enjoyed. And so it wasn't something that I was necessarily pursuing. It wasn't until it was about 2005 that I started doing triathlons. And that that was kind of my first intro into getting into the endurance world. I guess like to rewind back a little bit, my senior year, I did decide to not play football, which was like a killer because football is like my favorite sport. I love football, but being like 5'5" and 120 pounds, it was not going anywhere. But I remember like sitting in the parking lot of my high school and being like, trying to decide, because I had some really good friends. Growing up, I had a swimming pool in my backyard, so I always swam, but not like I'd never taken a swim lesson, never swam competitively. And so I remember my friends, like I would race them all the time, and I was kind of just like the guy who was like really fast at like sprinting in the pool, but with like no technique. And one of my friends was on the swim team, and he was really good. He was like, you should just come to the swim team. Like, you don't have to like try out. You can just like basically show up, right? There's like, if you're willing to show up at 5 in the morning for practice, like
You're
we'll
on the
have you on
team.
the team. And so, yeah, so I quit football. All my friends, like my best friend was the quarterback in high school. And so it was like this, they were like, what are you doing? Like, and I was like, I don't know. I'm just going to try something different. And so I swam, and somehow I made state swimming that year in like the 50 and the 100. And I was really fast at sprinting, but I had zero technique. And literally the coach told me, like, when we would go to swim practice, I was not even allowed to do the other strokes because I was so terrible. And so that was kind of like my intro into like endurance. And then after that, I went into college, and I never really thought anything about it. And there was an Ironman in where I grew up in Coeur d'Alene, and one of my friends took me down. I had no idea what an Ironman was. Like I didn't know it consisted of swimming, biking, and running. And so we went down there and watched the finish line. And I remember specifically watching this guy. His name was Matt Seeley, and he was kind of this local legend out of Polson, Montana. And he was a math teacher. And I remember he got like fifth in the race, fifth, maybe third. And I remember thinking, like, this guy's a math teacher, and like he's like doing this, like it can't be that hard. Like I was so naive. And so I just remember I just went down the next day. I bought a bike, I bought a wetsuit, and was like, I'm going to do the Coeur d'Alene Triathlon. It's like Olympic distance race in 8 weeks. And so I just started training. I had no idea how to train. I basically took my sprint training and swimming and applied that to the mile swim, and then just biked and ran whatever for training. And so I had done this race, and I was like hooked on endurance sports, because at that point I was like, oh, this is like something where I can, like, if I work hard, I can get better at it. You know, it's not like a talent thing necessarily, like at that point. And so I was pretty decent at swimming, and not great at biking. I was always pretty good at running, but it's probably just because I was fairly small, and I was always kind of quick, like I was like a wide receiver. And so I did quick sports.
Mhm.
And so I picked up on it pretty quick. And basically for the next 10 years, that like consumed my life of doing triathlons and building all the way up to the Ironman distance. And so moving forward, like with my coaching career, I started coaching like little kids, like teaching them how to swim at the YMCA when I was in college down at Boise. So I went to Boise State from 2007 to 2010. And so I was teaching these little kids how to swim at the YMCA, and I just needed a job to do on the side while I was doing school and triathlon. And then one day the master's coach didn't show up for master's swimming, and they were like, hey, can you write a workout for the swimming? At that point, I've been doing triathlon for a couple of years, so I knew like the structure of swim workouts and things. And at that point, I was already kind of like, I remember watching like, do you remember like Flow Track and like Flow Swim, like those websites?
I don't know that I was ever on Flow Swim, but Flow Track for sure was like the beginning of college for me.
I think it was Flow Swim, but it was like similar to Flow Track, and basically it was like you get workouts and things. And so I was like already like watching those and like getting workouts and like learning about the process of like swimming and how to put together these sets. And so I was like, sure, I can like write it up on the board. And so I started coaching, and they were like, hey, would you like to just sub when some people like miss? And I remember I was probably, gosh, what was I, like 24 at the time? And I remember it was like very overwhelming, because we had like the Masters national swim champ, like in one of the lanes. And like, there was almost a Division I swimmer in like in every lane. It was like a Duke swimmer, University of Arizona swimmer, like a Cal swimmer. Like one guy had been fourth in Olympic trials. Like it was like, so I was like, I think that I was approachable in the fact of like they knew that I only knew so much, but also they knew that I was willing to show up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I knew enough about what I was doing to at least give them decent advice. And I was really attracted to working with like the swimmers who were like either the beginners or like really slow swimmers that were like, especially like a lot of the intro triathletes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would do a lot of work with them. And as long as there was a set on the board, the fast swimmers, elite swimmers, they would just swim their set and do what they needed to do. They've been doing this for, 25 or 30 years. And so I started doing that. And they asked me if I would then coach like the group like 4 days a week. And so then I had 3 classes every morning and I would coach, and I was basically coaching every day. And then I was asked to coach on the age group swim team. And at this point, I had never done like a breaststroke, like in the pool. It's crazy. Like, but I was studying, like watching videos, and like the coaches were teaching me. I was willing to learn everything. And so I think that the desire to learn the technique and really try to figure out what it was and like how to get better at it. And especially coming from where I was, I knew like as a swimmer who didn't grow up swimming, I was more relatable to a lot of people. And so they found that easier for me to explain ways, because it wasn't like you were just this person who grew up like a little fish in the water. It was like, oh, you just catch the water. And so I think that helped a lot of people. And so at this point, I was like doing triathlons. I started doing triathlons, and I was like getting like top 3 overall, like in most of all of the triathlons I was doing, and qualifying like for Kona and like age group nationals and things like that. And so I really wanted to pursue triathlons professionally. And my wife wanted to go back to school, to go to medical school. And so I had reached out to some coaches. I was offered like a bunch of age group swim jobs, like in Denver and North Carolina, different places. But it was basically places where Meg was like applying to school, but also where I could work. And ironically, the only place I wasn't offered a swimming job was Bend, Oregon, where we ended up moving to, where she was finishing her schooling. But so I ended up working at a running store there. And I turned pro after that and started racing the last few years there as a professional triathlete. And while I was in Bend, I worked at the community college, and I was the coach of the running club and the triathlon club. And so at this point now we're like at 2012 to like 2015. And so I'd now been coaching for like a number of years. So I was, pretty decent swim coach and running coach. And I knew enough I'd like trained with like enough elite athletes. And there was this great group in Bend that I trained with and learned a lot about training theories. And they all had coaches. And so it was really a good like baptism by fire to be able to like train with them and learn like what people are doing like at the top of the sport, So and then basically from after Bend, we made it to Reno, and that's where I drove my moving van and met Kurt and met you and started run coaching.
I didn't realize that you had been run coaching for so long. Like I knew that you had coached in Bend, but I guess I just didn't realize how long you guys were in Bend. Like since 2012, that was like my entire college career, basically.
Yeah. So we were there because Meg had to go. She had got a degree in marketing, and so she had to take all of the prereqs to get into medical school. And so we wanted to just live somewhere that was like great for triathlon training and stuff like that. So I was able to train with great people like Jesse Thomas and Matt Lieto, and those guys already had like a group, and so we were able to like they had friends that came in and that were like top 3 in Kona, and so it was an amazing experience to train and live that life. But at that point, I had moved on to the last year we were in Bend is like when I decided that I was going to stop doing triathlons and move into trail running. Yeah.
And here we are.
Here we are.
I love hearing the story about you like watching videos and stuff for technique of like the swimming so that you could coach people, because I feel like that not necessarily that you're watching videos, but you're constantly doing research. Like nothing in my training over the last 6 years, that's a long time, has stayed the same. Like it's constantly changing because it feels like you're always doing research and bringing new things into our training, like whether it's nutrition or like sauna training or just like the way that we recover, stuff like that. And so you've been doing that for a long time, it seems.
Yeah. I think it's like my background too, coming from triathlon and having so many different sports and nutrition, that I was able to bring that into trail running to where it was like you're constantly evolving, right? Like the competition's always getting faster, science is always getting better. A lot of the core principles stay the same, right? It's like threshold and VO2 and volume and things like that are always going to be the same. They've been the same for a long time. but there's definitely ways that you can like tweak things or try things and incorporate new ideas. Not only to make the athletes better, but also keep them engaged and also healthy. I think we have runners that are running longer, that are healthier, certainly, into their 40s and 50s that we weren't having in previous
definitely not.
generations.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's always evolving. I think as a coach, it's kind of your responsibility to be that filter, to take in all that information and just try to do the best you can to provide the best resources and information for your athletes.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll get a little bit more into like, I guess your coaching philosophy and stuff in a little bit, but I'm thinking maybe we chat a little bit about like coach athlete relationship first.
Mhm.
And I'm curious what you think like the cornerstone of a successful coach athlete relationship, because if you ask me or Tommy or Helen, we're just like in the cult of Rick, and whatever you tell us to do, we do. You could probably ask us to jump off a bridge and we would definitely do it. So I'm just, yeah, what is your cornerstone of coach athlete relationship?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, comes down to belief, in the process and what you're doing. And I think once you can get, like I had talked about early on, like you were reluctant. And when you have athletes they're not sure to like buy into the coaching, that's the worst thing that can happen, because then they're always wondering, am I doing enough? Is this person's doing this? Should we be doing this? And so once you get an athlete to believe in like the process of what you're doing, like to prepare them mentally, physically, emotionally, like for racing, like I think that's when you start to like cultivate this environment to succeed in individually. And so I always try to approach it, each athlete is different, and however I'm working with an athlete, every person, needs something different in their training, in their preparation, the style of racing. There's so many different variables. And so I really try to like individualize and have different relationships with each of my athletes. And they'll, I always tell athletes, like when I first start working with them, like the better that our relationship becomes, the better that you will perform, and the more you'll trust me, and this whole thing will work out. And so if they can buy into that and believe into it, and be patient, and that's when it pays off. And so that's why typically the athletes that I've worked with since I've started trail running. Like I don't have athletes that come and go, but I also invest a lot in the people that I work with, and I think that they understand that even if I don't know everything, that I'm doing my best to try to find whatever information it is that we need. And I try to work together as a team. And if they have ideas, or if we need to like reach out to other people or try new things, I'm always willing to adapt and try to figure out what the situation is, because I think there's a lot of different ways that you can get to the same endpoint in this sport. And oftentimes I think these coaches or programs, they think like there's one way to train an athlete, and it's like you need to do these specific things. It's like, oh, threshold training, or you need to do like little bits of fast running or intervals or whatever it is that these coaches live and die on. And I think each person can be different. And I think if you were able to like lock everybody up and train them and have them run 120 miles a week, and not have any relationships or outside stresses, we would all train them pretty similarly, right? But in the real life, we're training real people, and these people have jobs, and they have relationships, and they have family issues. And you know uh, I think what I've tried to do, especially, is like I typically work with like post-collegiate athletes. It's like the group that I enjoy working with the most. A lot of that is my background. Like I worked in student events and student clubs for the last decade. And so I really enjoy working with that group, but trying to figure out how they can be successful in that time period, because it's a struggle. It's like often I have these conversations all the time. It's like, well, what should I do for work? Should I work part-time? Should I work full-time? Like I had these conversations with you about, what's too much, and all of these stressors. And it's like they have significant others, or they break up with people, or all of these things affect your training. And people don't often realize that those all need to be factored into the training as well. And so I
Yeah.
just try to do my best to know the person and know what we need to, be doing, or sometimes, we need to like draw back a little bit and let that person, recover or relax, or give them a little bit of space as well.
Yeah. Stress is stress. so many people think that like they're still training inside of a bubble, even though that's far from the case. Whether they have a
Yeah,
coach or not, they're like, oh, like my, grandpa passed away, like everything's fine. And it's like, no, like that's
yeah.
not okay. Like it's okay for that to like take out a chunk of time in your training or yeah. And if I've learned anything about this podcast, it's that there are well, I already knew this, but there are so many different ways to get to these races. Like, sub ultra in general is so diverse in like the type of athletes that compete, like you've got road runners, you have ski mountaineers, you have people who have been on the trails their whole lives. And so it's just, there's no reason to train everybody the same because everybody's coming from a different place.
Yeah, it's so true.
And I mean, even Helen and I, and we talk about this a lot, and Helen said this on a couple podcasts. Like Helen and I come from the same exact background. Like we were literally on the same college team, like both ran track in college and in high school, and yet you train us wildly different.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I remember when I first met you, like you were like the alpha of like the
Mm.
team. I remember like you weren't even around and your presence was there like as a team. It was like, who's this Emkay person, right? And so you were just kind of like this unicorn that existed that I hadn't met yet when we first came on because you were doing cross country. And I remember Helen was like this very quiet, like shy, like almost like kind of timid person. And so she was like, she just kind of like kept to herself, like did her thing, whatever was like required. And I just remember her having like this relentless like attitude. Like I remember the coach just telling her, like, just stick onto this person's like hip, like in a race or something. That would be like the strategy. And it was like so effective because she was just
Yeah.
like, sure. She was just like would do whatever the coach told her to. Where you were like more systematic and you were like you would like come from like a lower mileage and like built up through college and like done the really, I felt like successful way of doing college
Yeah.
mileage, And so I think that that point you had kind of established that aura like within the team that like you knew what you were doing and you were very like calculated and
And Kirk and
were
I like collaborated on a lot of my training and racing at that point because like, I wanted to know more about how to like train people.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think that, like when I go to like coach both of you, it's like you said, it's very different. It's like I
Mhm.
have the same principles, right? And we do similar things, but just we do them in a different fashion. And two, you guys, even though you guys live close, you guys do live differently. Like she gets substantially more snow. And so, she tends to do more skiing, but she's much more of like an adventurous, I want to go out and kind of like suffer or do these hard things and like test yourself like mentally and physically, where you come from more of like the track or like marathon mindset. It's like, give me these sessions, like I need the numbers, like let's get this all dialed in. And then that gives you confidence to race, where it's like if I did that to Helen, it would just like squash her, right? She's like, she needs the freedom, she needs like a little bit of space. Like sometimes we do things like that are a little bit like free spirited, but for her, she gets confidence and enjoyment out of that. And so you both end up like at the same spot, but
Yeah.
like coming from two different training methodologies.
Yeah, I am very grateful that like you coach both Helen and I because like you said, I am very systematic. I like to like feel a certain way going into training. And one of the things that I think I would not have ever gotten past if Helen wasn't also a part of the team is like letting go of mountain long runs. Because there have been several times where like your plan just gets totally derailed. And that used to like really mess with my head. Like I'd be like, well, I didn't get the work in that I was supposed to get because there was snow here or whatever. And the more I hang out with Helen, the more I'm like, it doesn't really matter. Like
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
still out there
It's
for a long time. You didn't need to like get the exact workout in if you couldn't get it in.
yeah, it's like if you could just zoom out a little bit and be like, okay, what are we really trying to accomplish here? And it's like one day does not make the training cycle, like for that month, for that year, and like what we're building to ultimately over time.
Yeah. And as a coach, I tell people that all the time, but as an athlete, I'm like, but is that true?
Yeah, it's easy to say, harder to do, right?
Yeah, definitely. So everybody on this podcast or that listens to this podcast knows that I mostly run sub ultra races. Like the most I run is 50K. OCC would have been my longest race at 55. But I'm running Black Canyon tomorrow,
Yeah.
and I'm just curious, like, What were your initial thoughts when I approached you about racing Black Canyon, probably having told you like 2 months earlier that I'd never run 100K?
Yeah, I think, I always try to never encourage athletes to race longer distances or like push them to. And oftentimes I hold athletes back. I did this with Helen for a long time. She wanted to run 100 miles or longer for a while. And it's just, I've seen too many athletes go down an unhealthy road chasing those. And it's not that running long distance is unhealthy necessarily, but you can start to get caught up in that race. And then you might be doing too much. And it's just a lot of pressure. And so I think if you can just like hold back just a little bit, get a little bit of experience in some of the other races and distances, and not race too much or too many long races in a year, that can add longevity and years onto an athlete's career. And so I think when you initially approached me, I was surprised in the fact that you finally wanted to, but I think for a while I'd always thought that you would be good at long distance, especially like runnable long distance races, just because you've always had good foot speed. You're very efficient. And so I wasn't hesitant to say yes. And I think at that point too, I always felt like we had this big buildup and at Worlds, and you had this good race at Worlds, and then you kind of had this mental kind of like lag after that, and kind of like what's next. And especially then when you're not able to race, and the back half of your season kind of didn't go as the way you planned. I think that you needed something new to kind of like get that spark. And I think sometimes when you're racing really competitive sub ultras, I see this a lot with the really fast races, especially I think in the last 2 or 3 years, it's gotten really fast and really competitive. You can miss out, and you can be, out of the top 10 within a couple of minutes, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
it can be so demoralizing. You're like, well, you had a great race, and 2 years before that, you would have won the race. But it's like the competition is so high right now. The courses, I think, have gotten a little bit easier and more runnable.
Definitely.
And that's drawn in a lot more foot speed to the races. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that that's the reality of the situation. So you need to be prepared for it. So I think that's why you're seeing races play out a little bit more like a cross country or a track race, where it's like, people are finishing in the sequential order that's very quickly. And so I think for you, you kind of needed something to push yourself mentally and try something new, to like something just like a little bit to freshen up the staleness you'd had from like kind of those similar kind of 50K mountain races. So I was excited when you said it. I always want to make sure that you feel like you're actually ready, so we kind of sit on it for a little bit, make sure you're actually really willing to do it. And then I kind of joke with you, like, even though that you're signing up for this race, like, we're still going to build back up very slowly. And you were very, very concerned with how slowly we were starting to build back up. But yeah, I was excited. I think the race, a lot of the coaching that I do is I think is based off of specificity for the racing, right? The style, the distance. And so it's a good race for you to, it's a faster 100K. Time wise, it's competitive, so that makes it fast. Obviously the elevation's low, temperature looks great this year, so I don't think it's gonna be an issue. It's rocky, and so it's similar terrain that you have like around Reno and that you've had in Vegas. And so I think all of those factors, I think if you would have been like, hey, I'm gonna just go and do this like 20,000 feet of vertical 100K, I'd have been like, oh, that's
Bad idea.
So yeah, so I just, kind of looked at where we were at and thought, do we have enough time to prepare for this properly? And if you feel like mentally you can do it, and a big thing with athletes that live like in places where it snows is that, can you be ready mentally to be out grinding in the winter time, right? December, January, it can be tough for athletes when it's snowing, and especially if you're a skier and you want to be out cross country skiing or downhill skiing, that can be kind of hard to do. So I think, you kind of lucked out. Ski season kind of was like lagging behind. It wasn't a great year. You also hadn't raced for a while, so like you were kind of like excited to kind of continue on the training. You have great access to places like going down to Bishop and getting similar terrain, going down to Auburn to get that runnable terrain. And then luckily, like where you've lived, it's been, dry and runnable. So you haven't had it like run out on the roads for 100 miles a week. So
Oh
yeah,
gosh, yeah.
I'm excited for what you're doing. I don't think, we did anything drastic or crazy as far as like going from like sub ultra training to like 100 paid training. Typically elite athletes, once you're training at a specific level, if you're running 80 to 100 miles a week, it's more about manipulating the volume and the intensity than it is of like, oh, we need to do any of these like grandiose ideas, right? So it's like, hey, let's add in a couple of like back-to-back longer runs, let's back off on some of the shorter sessions, let's add on some strength. We worked a lot on the specifics of that kind of that foot speeding efficiency at like high zone 2, flat
Yeah.
running. We did like some downhill stuff. So just the specifics, like the demands of what the race requires to make sure you're prepared for it. But as far as the training itself, I don't think we did anything other than just extending some of the sessions or weekends, the volume.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would imagine that like training for, Mont Blanc Marathon and training for Black Canyon are going to be like drastically different. And I guess in some ways they are, because I'm not getting as much vert in a week. Like I'm maybe getting 10,000 feet as opposed to like 20 to 25. But like my volume has been pretty much exactly the same as it normally would be. Like I'm somewhere between 90 to 100 miles a week, but instead of it being like spread out, it just seemed like it was more focused on the weekends instead of
Mhm.
like, usually I run the same mileage, but I'm not doing 50 miles in 2 days.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and one session that I have you do that I love to do for longer races, really anything over 50K is doing those like mountainous hilly runs on like a Saturday and then the runnable runs on a Sunday. And for you it might be 20, 25 miles each day. So it's like close to race distance. And I think that really helps of you can do some efforts like on Saturday, whether it's like uphill or downhill. And then Sunday, you can get used to running on tired legs, but also making sure that you kind of have that efficiency and turnover for the distance. And that seems to work really well for runners. And I've even used that for like back to the pack runners. It's an effective session as long as you're able to like build up to it appropriately. It works pretty well. And then, we added on some of those like big singles. I think you have to, if you want to be competitive, you certainly need to run, that 25 to 30 mile range for one run, at like with either race pace efforts or some specificity in order to really do well with these races. And so we just kind of mixed those in and made sure that you were handling the volume and the load and not picking up any niggles or injuries. And
Yeah. So that kind of gets us to, I guess, the taper section of this that I mentioned earlier. You don't really taper me much typically. Like, and I think it started, correct me if I'm wrong, but like before Broken Arrow in 2021, I had
Mhm.
gone to a race in Sweden and absolutely eviscerated my ankle. And then Broken Arrow was like 6 weeks later or something like that. And so we basically did a reverse training block in a way where you had to like build me up into Broken Arrow and
Mhm.
instead of like tapering me down, because I had to take 2 weeks off and then I was like kind of on the treadmill and then on the trails. And so in my head, that's when the short taper started, but I'm wondering like why you don't taper me as much.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think people need to know the background first. You have this innate ability to like roll your ankle like 3 to 4 weeks before almost every race, like terribly. And so it always puts me in this position of like, right as the peak of training is happening, somehow you roll your ankle and put us in this position of like, okay, how do we get to the race now? And so I've actually found with injuries specifically over time that these almost reverse tapers have been really effective for athletes getting back into races. It's almost like getting a little bit of that fatigue out and then building the mileage back up. One, I think it gets rid of a lot of that. Am I doing enough jitters, like worrisome before the race? And then also, I think you can maintain a fairly high aerobic volume going into the races as long as you've been able to sustain that over time. and it doesn't affect your race. And I think where you have to be careful with is things like the downhill, like the eccentric loading, or too fast at intervals, or how you mix the mileage up with those maybe 1 to 2 weeks before the race. But yeah, I think you can carry fairly high mileage going into these races. So yeah, I think at that point we had tested out a few different theories because everyone responds differently. Some people do really well with these big tapers, and some people do well with not tapering at all. And so it's like it's very individualized, and it's also not just like, oh, I did well at this race because I did this, right? And so we have to try to like not draw these tangents like because you did so well at this race. And so what I try to do is look over time, okay, like when we build through maybe some of these races that were like B races or like not, how well did you race? How were you feeling going into the race? And then how did you actually race, right? And so over time, we started to see, okay, if we maintain the volume and then cut back on some of the intensity and then just add a little bit like right before the race, you seem to perform better. And so we just started to maintain that. I also think too, like if you have a lot of these like ups and downs constantly in training, you tend to have a lot of like ups and downs in races. And so it's like, oh, I felt great this race and not this race. And so I feel like if you can kind of maintain that over time, not only getting the benefit of maintaining that mileage and volume, over years is what makes people race so well once they get older. But also I think you have less of these fluctuations in race results because you're not always wondering, did I taper too much? Did I taper too little? It's like, let's just tweak a few things and then drop it down. I've noticed like certainly dropping like the vertical in like the 2 weeks before that can really help because that can leave your legs feeling a bit flat. So little things like that we can adjust to help. Like Helen's kind of the same way. Typically I have her do like really big runs right before a race. And so oftentimes like 6 days out from the race, I think like, I don't know if it was like Broken Arrows, Speedgo, it might've been both, but she would do like 20 milers before the race. And so I think is one, you have to have a lot of trust in your athletes knowing that they're not going to do too much in that time, right? And so that's another thing is like having that trust in the athlete. It's like, okay, if I tell you to do this, can you actually control yourself during, and do what you need to be doing, because that can affect your race. But also just seeing how athletes then respond to that. And some athletes get confidence too, carrying that over. So I always take it like an athlete basis, and sometimes we get it wrong, so we have to adjust. And I think sometimes you just have to look and see over a long period of time what tends to work, and then we just try to incorporate that regularly for athletes, because there's so many things that go wrong, as in races, like travel, and like you might get a sickness or you get a little niggle, or so you always have to be flexible and try to just figure out like, how can I get my athlete like healthy as possible and happy as possible, like, and mentally prepared to do the race.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting point too. You mentioned that like we have tried different things and sometimes it doesn't always work. And I think that a lot of athletes don't often give coaches enough time. Like they're like, oh, well, I had this coach for this race and it didn't work out. So like I got a new coach. And it's like you lose the consistency, but also like, yes, a coach knows what they're doing. Like they've done the research, like they've, trained a bunch of other athletes, but you're not all the other athletes. So you still have to do some amount of like experimenting and learning about these people in order for them to like have success. So like long-term coaching, in my opinion, at least, and I'm sure in yours as well, is like way more successful than if you're like constantly bopping around trying to change it up or, keep things fresh or whatever you want to call it. Like consistency is the key in any training.
For sure. Yeah. And I think I see athletes do that, especially like post-collegiately in this space where they're trying to figure out like, should I have a coach? Should I not have a coach? And they feel this immense pressure to then take on a coach. Yeah. And I think oftentimes they compare trail running to the way like the collegiate system works. And they're like, oh, I have this like finite time to like get a contract and like win races. And more oftentimes, if you just like develop this relationship with a coach, oftentimes it's like the fit. I have some athletes that approach me that I haven't worked with that we both decided that it's just not a good fit because they need something else from their coach. And I also need something else from the athlete. And if that doesn't work, I don't want to run like this coaching empire where I just like take on everybody and I just throw all these eggs on the wall and here's like a training plan and it works for a few people and they do really well and win these races, and a whole bunch of people it just like, you know, not to be dramatic, but like destroy their lives of like they feel like they never had a chance in the sport, or they like ruin relationships, or they felt like they got the short end of the stick. You know, it's like I want to try to work with these athletes to I love working with post-collegiate athletes that like want to get contracts and want to be sponsored, and but we try to do it in a way that's like sustainable and over time, because athletes tend to sell themselves short and they feel this pressure like if I don't do it this year then I've just got to like go and work like the 9 to 5, you know. And it's like,
Yeah.
let's find a way to like work into this and like gradually work our way through the sport. And you can have a long career. You see tons of athletes who are in their late 30s that are making a lot of money in the sport and been doing this a while. You know, it's like at 23, if you haven't made it, you still have some time.
Oh my gosh. If I had given up at 23, I'd be nowhere. But yeah, I mean, I've had people ask me that before where they're like, well, wouldn't you want to like switch it up, you know, like try some new stuff? And I'm like, well, that's the thing is like I have a coach that I trust and I have a relationship with, and we do try new things like all the time. Like we
Yeah.
talk about like, oh, the training for this race like was pretty great and I felt good doing this one. And like this was the time this year that I felt the best in a race. And we take all that information and we make something new instead of having to start completely over with somebody else and form a new relationship. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not interested in that. It's like a hairdresser, like same thing. I have one hairdresser. I can't go anywhere else because I have curly hair. So don't even ask me to like
Yeah.
switch it up.
Yeah, and that's why I always tell people, like, I'm never worried that athletes are going to like leave me to go with somebody else or something, because I never sell athletes on a training plan or a theory. You know, it's like if I always form my coaching around the relationships that I have with my athletes, that's something that they can't just go and buy or get somewhere else, right? And
Yeah.
so that's an intangible difference of what I try to provide to the athletes is the relationship and the communication that we have, you know, on a daily point. Like I said, there's certain things that I don't know, and there's certainly coaches that know more than me. And I just try to always do my best to provide the best information to my athletes. And, you know, if anybody ever wants to go to another coach, I would never get upset, or this is ultimately it's their career and their lives. And I think because I worked with student athletes in the college for so long, like I know how difficult this process can be over time, and so I just want people to be happy in the way that they approach this. And if they're not happy with the situation, I certainly don't want to continue, you know, working with them when they could try something else. So
Yeah, definitely. So I feel like you and I could literally do a podcast for like 2 whole hours, but I know that you're gonna get kicked out of where you're sitting sometime. So I'm just gonna ask you a couple of like more general questions before we close out here. I think I already know the answer to this question because it's been something that you've been commenting on my Strava for many years now. But what do you consider to be the most critical aspect of any training block?
yeah. Are you referring to when I comment too fast on your training?
Yes.
That was like the thing that I would do all the time when you first started. Yeah, I think, you know, trying to get athletes to slow down certainly on a lot of their training, especially post collegiately, is something that I've kind of preached on a lot. I think there's a time and a place for running consistent mileage at a good clip, you know, if you're training for a road marathon or something like that. But overall, in general, to keep athletes healthy, you know, I always try to limit injuries for my athletes. And I take a lot of pride in knowing like I don't have my athletes don't get a lot of like bone injuries and tendon injuries and things like that. And sometimes I'm maybe a little bit protective or hold athletes back a little bit, but it's enough to where I can like zoom out and be like, here's the big picture. It's like we could push a little bit here and this could affect you for years to come, or we could just like hold back a little bit and you can have a longevity in the sport. And so I think that that's something that I'm always kind of struggling with. But yeah, I definitely think, you know, easy running. And then a big thing is like the specificity of training of races. I think now they're getting so competitive in all of the racing, like whether it's mountains or roads or just uphill. there's a lot of different ways to train and a lot of different styles of races, and people come from so many different backgrounds that you just have to learn and adapt to each athlete and train them more specifically for these races, because we're not all people like Killian or Courtney who can win any race that we enter. And so sometimes I think that those ideas in there of these people who are at the pinnacle of the sport, that like, well, if I just do this, I can do any race that I want to do. And it's just too competitive and too hard in this sport. And I think that the trajectory of the sport, the way it's going, it's going to continue only to get faster and more competitive. And so we just have to almost go into a way of like, okay, you need to be a 5K person. And, you can't just be like, I can be ready for the VK and to win UTMB and to do all of these different races,
Those athletes are far and few between.
Yeah.
It's funny, I got a Strava memory like a week ago from when I was living in Vegas when you were first training me and commenting on my runs that I was running too fast all the time. And it was a run that was like 7:20 pace or something. And my description was like, chill, super easy day. And you would not catch me running like faster than 8-minute pace on, on any of those runs now. Super chill, just hanging out at 7:20 pace. But like that was my entire collegiate career, was just me running all of my easy mileage at 7-minute pace at altitude.
Yeah. See, I mean, it only took me 6 years to get that.
Yeah. And now Helen and you and Tommy have turned me into a little bit of a jogger.
Yeah, jogging life.
This one I'm curious about because I know you coach people that are in a couple of different areas of the country. And so for athletes without access to like mountainous terrain or trails, how do you structure their training for a mountain race?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I always tell athletes you're at a huge disadvantage. If you live somewhere flat, and you want to do a really mountainous race, especially if it's at altitude, it just kills me. It's because it's like it's so hard to do, and it's not. I almost feel bad because it's just you don't have the same opportunities, right?
Yeah.
If you live in Reno versus, if you live in flat Texas or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And certain people are able. I think the big thing is if you can build up to a really strong marathon type fitness, you can tend to race well at a lot of those distances. And then if you have access to a treadmill, you can do uphill intervals for strength, whether it's like shorter intervals or long continuous runs. You can do a stair climber for like really specific steep terrain. But I think the big disadvantage you have is one is altitude if you're living lower. And then two is the eccentric loading for the downhills. So a lot of times athletes, they could be running and be really fit and run 90 miles a week and feel like they're ready for these big races. And they might be for the uphills because as long as you have that leg strength, you can do it. But the eccentric loading over time, especially in a race, catches up to you. And so if you haven't done any of that, it's going to really affect your race. And so I would say those people who live there, if they have any type of hills, I would have them do short downhill reps. I mean, I have you do that in like the wintertime. You find any hill you can find and you run fast down it, right? So it might be 3 by a mile. But if you only have, say, a 300-meter hill, we might do 10 reps of that or something, but it's really hard. And that's going to like help load your legs. And that's probably the best you could do. I would even have an athlete, if they were able to take a trip rather than focusing specific on long runs, it's like, let's go and like work some of these really steep downhills to get some of that eccentric loading, because you don't need a lot of it, but you have to have some in your legs in order to perform at those races. Otherwise, you're just going to be shattered by the end of the race.
Yeah, unless it's like an all uphill and then all downhill race, but that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
Usually you have to turn around and go back uphill at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
And a final question for you is, which coach, if any, has had the most significant impact on your approach to coaching? It could even be your high school football coach.
Oh gosh. Ironic. So here's an interesting bit is my high school football coach is now the University of Nevada football coach, Jeff Cho.
No way.
Yeah, he was my football
That's
coach.
crazy.
So he was a hard-headed, very strict, tough coach. But anyways, as far as running goes, people that I tend to, be really diversified in like the type of people that I look up to are the coaches because of coming from triathlon. So most of the coaches that I knew originally, you know, were guys that I trained with, like Matt Dixon, who worked with Jesse Thomas, and there was a great swim coach in LA that started Tower 21. His name's Jerry Rodriguez, and he's like a world-renowned swim coach. I really like the way that I went down and worked with him for a week one time, and I just had emailed him and said, hey, can I come down and come? And like he just was like, sure, yeah, come down and swim with the group. He was like so approachable, and like you could tell his athletes really liked him. He wasn't this loud person. He was just like, he would work with each person no matter who showed up. And I really appreciated like his like bedside manner kind of like with each swimmer like in the pool. So that's someone that I really look up to, like Mario Fraioli in the running world. Like he's like his coaching, you know, I always find athletes will be like, oh, I didn't realize this guy was coached by Mario. Or I think a lot of his information is just really science backed and really informative. He's great at writing, so I love to read anything that he writes. He's just like a wealth of information, his podcast. And then just like research people like Steven Seiler, you know, out of Norway. He has tons of great information. All the Norwegian training is all the rage, right? And then a lot of like the coaching mentality stuff I get from Nick Saban, the Alabama football previously. It's tough to swallow. But his focus on like the process and getting the most out of individuals, right? So what I try to always tell my athletes is like focusing on the process, not the result. You know, like be happy and healthy, like in the training, because like racing is such a small percentage of what you do. You know, your husband, Tommy, he calculated one time, it was like 1% of all of his activity was racing. And I was like, listen, if you're not happy in the 99%, right? And you're doing all of this training and you're miserable just to be happy for this 1%, like it's not a way to live. So let's find a way to make this, you know, most enjoyable. And then if you have a few bad races, well, it's only, you know, 1% of your total activity for the year. So it's not really that bad. So yeah, focusing on the process and getting the most out of individuals, each person is what I try to do. So those are kind of people that I look up to. I'm always reading about whatever new research articles and people, and you know, any information I can dig up or science things. I try to do like peer reviewed stuff, try not to get too caught up in like the fads, and look at kind of like the trends over time versus like, oh, what's the latest, you know, workout to do that everyone's doing this year type thing.
Yeah, let's all do double threshold all the time.
Double threshold is it, right?
Yeah. I remember when Tommy did that math on his Strava or whatever, and I think he found out that I had run like my races were like 7 or 8% or something of my year. He's like, you race too much. I was like, whatever, dude.
You would.
Yeah, I just like to race. Tommy likes to train, and that's just who we are.
Yeah, we just got to make everybody happy.
Exactly. And actually, I thought that was the last question, but Danny put a question in here that I have to ask you, which is, from your perspective, should I consider accepting a golden ticket if I happen to race myself into one tomorrow?
Oh gosh.
Because I've already said on at least 2 podcasts that I'm not taking it. So
I know, right? So this was never a thing. One, I never like to have athletes just like spring up and be like, oh, let's just do a golden ticket. Like, quick side story, like when Helen raced CCC, I didn't even know it was a golden ticket race because it wasn't consideration. I already told her like, you are not racing Western states yet type thing. So we didn't even think about it. So the fact that I know this is a golden ticket race makes this a little bit difficult. And I've gone back and forth about like what I would do. I think for this race, physically, you can be ready. I can prepare you as best as possible. But I think for these type of races, you have to be mentally prepared. And I think they're going to kick me out in 10 minutes, the library.
perfect timing.
And so, but it's funny. Do you remember when you text me when you were crewing or you were pacing at Western States this
And
year?
I said, I will never run this race.
You said, I don't have the bug. That does not look fun.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, I wouldn't say no, but I would say if you were 100% mentally prepared to suffer, then I would say yes, because physically we can have you ready, but mentally, can you be ready to be down in that canyon when this year it's going to be terribly hot, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I think that Western states would have to start offering like appearance fees
yeah.
for me to want to come.
But it's a draw. I mean, you get sucked in, you get down there, it's exciting. People are racing. It's like there's so much camaraderie with the event and it's so iconic. And so, I think turning down golden tickets certainly is something you don't want to do regularly, right? Because it's like
Yeah.
they become harder and harder to come by. But also, I think it's something like if you're not preparing for it, you don't want to put yourself in the position then to do a race that you're not prepared to go deep into because
Yeah.
that's what it takes to perform at that race.
Yep. I told Tommy the other day that if I turn it down, I have to turn it down knowing that I may never get one again and be okay with
True.
that.
True.
So, well, thank you so much for chatting with us today or chatting with me. I'm used to Danny being here too. I'll let you go since you're about to get kicked out of the library. But yeah, thanks again. And hopefully people will get some good insight about like coaching and what a coach athlete relationship I don't maybe I shouldn't say should because I'm biased, but should look like.
Yeah, thanks, Emkay. It's been awesome.
This has been the Sub Hub Podcast brought to you by Free Trail.